reading is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks? Representative Wisegraham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HB 1029 is a bill brought on behalf of the South Dakota retirement system. This bill is a reorganization and an update of the laws and administrative rules governing the administration of the South Dakota retirement system. This bill adds value for members and non-members by enhancing statutory clarity, increasing transparency, and improving the overall user experience. Navigating the authorities and administrative rules governing the South Dakota retirement system takes time and skill. The net result of this bill is harmonizing existing laws and administrative rules to allow members and non-members to better navigate and educate themselves about the system. Well, I am pleased to bring it. As chair of the House Retirement Laws. This is a lengthy bill. We went into it in detail and asked lots of questions of the retirement system officials. And I'm satisfied that it does do exactly what they intended to do. And that's bringing more clarity by putting the workings of the retirement system in statute. You know, we should be very proud of SDRS. They're one of only 2 systems in the country that are fully funded. They are not a liability to our balance sheet. So I would please ask you to join me in voting for HB 1029. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further remarks on House Bill 1029? Any further remarks? Seeing no further remarks, question before the House is final passage of House Bill 1029. All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed, nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine, and the members will proceed to vote. Representative Odenbach. Granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the assistant leader and I are behaving ourselves here today because right above us we have Bishop Donald DeGroot, the Diocese of Sioux Falls, and I would ask him to stand and everybody welcome him here to the House.
Representative Duffy. Mr. Speaker, members have voted.
The clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there were ayes 68, excused 1.
House Bill 1029, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elect, is hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? Seeing none, the title is deemed correct.
House Bill 1027, an act to repeal obsolete provisions pertaining to non-collecting retailers.
House Bill 1027, having had its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks? Representative Aylward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. The bill you have before you, HB 1027, is if you take a look at it, we're repealing a bunch of language. You might ask what it does. So it's Chapter 1063. It requires remote sellers that have more than $100,000 in sales made in South Dakota in a year to place a notice on its website that the purchaser may have a use tax obligation with the state since no sales tax was paid. So this law got placed on the books in 2011, which was prior to our current chapters 1064 and 1065. Which were brought in 2016. It was also prior to the Wayfair versus South Dakota decision that we had. Now, as you see before you, it's all being struck out because it's now obsolete with the passage of 1064 and 1065. It's no longer needed since all remote sellers with more than $100,000 in sales in South Dakota in a year must now collect and remit sales tax. So not too often we get to bring a bill where we get to strike some language. So I hope you vote yes with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further remarks on House Bill 1027? Any further remarks? Seeing no further remarks, the question before the House is final passage of House Bill 1027. All those in favor vote yea. Those opposed, nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine and the members will proceed to vote. Representative Heerman.
Personal privilege.
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Students for Higher Education Day, or SHED, is an annual event where student leaders from across South Dakota convene for the legislative session in Pierre. Each of our Board of Regents institutions sends as many members of their student government as possible so that they may network with colleagues, meet members of the state government, and experience our legislative session, as many of you saw within committee meetings and walking the halls this morning. The Student Federation, a representative body for all of South Dakota Regent schools, organizes student efforts at SHED. Their respective mission is to advocate for all students within the South Dakota Regential system. The Federation is comprised of student leaders from each South Dakota Board of Regent institution, including the student body presidents, vice presidents, senators, a Federation vice president, president, and executive director. Please help me welcome the students from SHED that are here with us today.
Representative Hughes. Granted.
I would just like to also welcome the SHED Days participants here in 78, 79. I was the executive director of the South Dakota Student Federation, and I participated in some of the early SHED Days and formed a lot of experiences and relationships that have stayed with me and encouraged me to stay active and eventually run for the House. So thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Derby. Representative Schaefbauer. Mr. Speaker, all members have voted.
Clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there were ayes 68, excused 1.
House Bill 1027, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elect, is hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? Seeing none, the title is deemed correct.
House Bill 1051, an act to update provisions on the interim legislative oversight of administrative rulemaking.
House Bill 1051, having had its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks? Representative Mortensen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House of Representatives, I bring to you House Bill 1051 at the request of your Rules Review Committee. Rules promulgation is one of the most complicated processes we have in state government, often the most opaque. The changes that we're going to be making today will make it easier to navigate for the public, easier to navigate for the agencies that are asking for rules to be put through it, and more transparent for the public in a general way. It makes several clarifications. It also adds in one section a requirement that the proposed rules be posted online in addition to the published notice in the newspaper. All of these are good changes. They are brought to you at the request of Code Counsel, who rides herd on this process, and the Rules Review Committee comprised of members of this body. I ask your green vote, and we'll stand by for any questions.
Thank you. Further remarks on House Bill 1051? Any further remarks? Seeing no further remarks, the question before the House is final passage of House Bill 1051. All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed, nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine, and the members will proceed to vote.
Mr. Speaker, all members have voted.
The clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there were ayes 68, excused 1.
House Bill 1051, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elect, is hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? Seeing none, the title is deemed correct.
House Bill 1044, an act to authorize the use of a newborn safety device for the voluntary surrender of a newborn and to make clarifying changes.
House Bill 1044, having had its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks? Representative Soy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. House Bill 1044 is known as the Baby Gabriel Bill. On August 6th of 2024, a newborn baby boy was tragically found deceased at the recycling center in Sioux Falls. This was a great tragedy that really affected the community. The boy was later named Gabriel James Doe, and a community funeral service was held with hundreds in attendance, and I'm really thankful for the support that he received. This incident brought up many questions about how to prevent such a tragedy in the future. Where can parents in crisis turn if they need to surrender their child? I personally heard from several constituents who wanted to know if baby boxes were available in South Dakota and what they could do to help. So 3 days after baby Gabriel was found, the organization Safe Haven Baby Boxes received a phone call from someone with a 605 area code. It was a new mother who had just given birth and wanted to know where the nearest newborn surrender box was located. Unfortunately, the answer was Fort Dodge, Iowa, and it just wasn't possible for her to get there. Thankfully, in this situation, the organization was able to keep the mother on the line and encourage her to surrender the newborn at the nearest hospital or fire station under our current Safe Haven laws. Safe Haven received another call later from the mother, and she shared that she had indeed surrendered the baby at a hospital and that both she and the child had received medical care anonymously under the name Jane Doe. A few days later, the organization also received confirmation of a legal safe surrender in a hospital in South Dakota. The story of baby Gabriel showed the public the need for our current safe haven laws, and the anonymous phone call demonstrates that mothers and people in the public are aware of the existence of baby surrender boxes in other states. These mothers and fathers in some cases want to do what is best for the child, but they are impeded by the desperate situation that they find themselves in. Sometimes a face-to-face surrender is just too much for the parent to bear. This bill does not attempt to change our current safe haven laws, but simply adds one more option for a parent in crisis. If a face-to-face surrender is just too much for the mother or father, we want there to be a last resort option of independent surrender via an infant safety device, which is also known as a baby surrender box. Just to be clear, this is a totally optional option. It's not a mandate on anyone, and there's no state funding that's involved. The idea is that community groups like Right to Life are ready to raise funds and bring public awareness to the availability of baby boxes. So this is one great opportunity for us as the government to open the door and allow the private sector to serve the community. I ask for your support for baby Gabriel's bill, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Further remarks on House Bill 1044? Any further remarks? Representative Shorma.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to stand up and share. I don't know if any of you watched the television show Long Lost Family, but there was an 80-year-old plus woman that was identified as a person who had left, she self-identified herself, she left a baby in a box on the step of a gas station about a half an hour before they opened up, because she just could not bear disclosing to someone that she had this on her own and nobody knew about this. She went up the hill, drove around behind, and watched to see that the child was actually recovered by somebody, and it was. It took 50 years for the child to find her mother. She thought about this child every day of her life. So I think a safe way for people to bring their child to a point where they can anonymously give the child a chance at life, which is a whole lot better option than the alternative. I'm going to rise to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Further remarks on House Bill 1044? Representative Mullally.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this bill. I just have one question. How are we, I do realize that there are many individuals that had no idea that we had a safe haven program in the state of South Dakota. How are we going to be advertising to let everyone know that we now have these infant boxes?
Representative, are you addressing that question to the bill's prime sponsor?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Representative Soy, do you wish to answer that question?
I do. Thank you for the question and allowing me to elaborate on that. So there's no state funding that's involved in this. It's just private organizations. And South Dakota Right to Life has already committed to making this one of their statewide priorities. So the idea is that groups in different communities would fundraise and then also do the publicity. I know that some groups are already prepared to put up billboards, and I think it's just going to be a great positive thing for us all to be involved in.
Thank you. Anything further, Representative Mullally?
Thank you. And I want to commend the good representative for allowing the answer to that question, because too many times we always rely on the government to fund things like this. And if private entities are going to come forward and do the fundraising, my applause goes out to them.
Thank you. Further remarks on House Bill 1044, Representative Lems.
I just want to give a big me too and thank you to Representative from Sioux Falls for bringing this bill. My daughter, when she heard about baby Gabriel, was distraught. She called me. She's like, Mom, we have to do something. And she had done some research and came across the baby boxes. The more that I looked into it, there were people already involved in this that were way further down the road than I was. So I just want to commend again, the representative from Sioux Falls, and I am a me too.
Thank you. Further remarks on House Bill 1044. Any further remarks? Anything in closing, Representative Soy? Seeing no further remarks, the question before the House is final passage of House Bill 1044. All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine and the members will proceed to vote.
Mulder votes aye. Mr. Speaker, all members have voted.
Clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there were ayes 68, excused 1.
House Bill 1044, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elect, is hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? Seeing none, the title is deemed correct.
House Bill 1031, an act to update the South Dakota Retirement System member identity verification procedures.
House Bill 1031, having had its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks? Representative Wise-Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, this bill comes again from South Dakota Retirement System because they are listening to their members. They quite often survey their members, and this is something a majority of members are asking for. This bill updates the SDRS member identity verification procedures. If this would pass, SDRS members would be able to bring forms, present forms electronically. SDRS statutes require members to verify their identity by providing a driver's license. As technology has improved, more viable ways to exist to verify identity. This bill would allow SDRS to utilize other identification verification methods as a service to members, such as dual factor authentication. Okay. In addition to submitting physical forms, the SDRS could allow its members to submit certain forms through its secure online portal. So this is just, this is the authorization. If we vote in an affirmative way, SDRS can fulfill many members' requests to submit forms electronically. So I would ask you to please join me in supporting HB 1031.
Thank you, Representative. Further remarks on House Bill 1031? Any further remarks? Seeing no further remarks, the question before the House is final passage of House Bill 1031. All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed, nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine and the members will proceed to vote. Representative Heineman. Granted.
Thank you. I'm kind of delayed here, but I was waiting for a moment that would be appropriate, and I guess maybe this is the best. I'm going to introduce my wife, Libby, up in the gallery there. She's the reason why I'm here today, spiritually and alive. Thank you.
Representative Derby, Representative Kaiser, Mr. Speaker, all members have voted.
Clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there were ayes 68, excused 1.
House Bill 1031, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elect, is hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? Seeing none, the title is deemed correct.
House Bill 1059, an act to clarify the meaning of teleconference for the purposes of open meeting requirements.
House Bill 1059, having had its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks? Representative Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the advancement in communication and technology, meetings of elected officials like City Council, County Commissioners, and school boards are able to discuss and consider more information with each other prior to meetings than ever before. Currently, there is no statute that clearly defines the issue of teleconference for purposes of open meeting requirements. This bill does. Teleconferences are emails, instant messaging, social media, text message, or virtual meeting platform. This legislation will help guarantee that the taxpayers, the ones who fund government, know exactly what information is being discussed. This bill is an effort to prohibit electronic backroom meetings. Now, another reason for this bill is the Attorney General's office comes out with a great informational brochure. But in there is a question and answer section of the pamphlet. And one of the questions is, are email discussions meetings for purposes of open meeting laws? And in the answer to that question, it says the body could be considered. So an email could be considered an open meeting violation or would have to adhere to open meetings. So I think that we need to give a definite answer to the elected government bodies. These actions are prohibited. And if you were asking me to summarize this bill, I would say the public's business must be discussed in public. This bill addresses the issue of teleconference and the importance of establishing open meeting laws that guarantee transparency when conducting the public's business. And I would ask for your favorable consideration. I would ask you to vote green. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further remarks on House Bill 1059? Any further remarks? Seeing no further remarks, the question before the House is final passage of House Bill 1059. All those in favor will vote yea, those opposed nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine and the members will proceed to vote. Representative Sharma. Granted.
Good afternoon again. Sorry. I want to read you a commemoration whereas Hannah Hyman and David Yeston Jr. have been selected and are serving in these high offices that are outstanding South Dakota leaders in the South Dakota American Legion, South Dakota Boys State, as South Dakota Boy State Governor and Girl State Governor. So whereas the Boy and Girl State are to help youth understand and appreciate the American system of government, the way of life, including the rights and responsibilities of citizenship, and to give better knowledge of the fundamental principles of government within the state of South Dakota through unique Learn by Doing workshop. And whereas South Dakota American Legion and Auxiliary have worked diligently for more than the last 80 years in conducting these fine programs. Now, therefore, be it commemorated on the 100th by the 100th legislature of the state of South Dakota that Hannah Hyman and David Houston Jr. be congratulated for their outstanding achievements, that appreciation be extended to those adults who donate time and energy to the program, and the South Dakota American Legion and Auxiliary be recognized for many years of sponsoring and conducting Boys and Girls State. In attendance today, our Girl State Governor, Hannah Hyman, Boy State Lieutenant Governor, Jesse Wentz of Canton, Boy State Director, Jean Opebrook of Spearfish, Girl State Director, Tiffany French of Custer. You up there? Okay. The American Legion Commander, Kevin Morello of Blackhawk. Okay. And the American Legion Auxiliary President, Anna Mae Warner of Alcester. And I forgot to mention that the Girl State Governor, Hannah Hyman, is from Clark. So if you would help me in congratulating them on their accomplishments and welcome them to the legislature.
Mr. Speaker, all members have voted.
Clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there were ayes 68, excused 1.
House Bill 1059, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elect, is hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? Seeing none, the title is deemed correct.
House Bill 1052, an act to prohibit the exercise of eminent domain for a pipeline that carries carbon oxide.
House Bill 1052, having had its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks? Representative Lems.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, pleased to stand before you today with HB 1052. And as I'm standing here today, I'm thinking about my extended family that I didn't even know 4 years ago, but have been privileged to know and come to know since. Those are the property owners across the state for who this bill was brought. And there's stories that I have heard over the last 4 years. Many of them would make your blood boil. These salt of the earth people that live in many of the counties from the southeast part of our state all the way up to the upper north middle and all of those counties in between. They have become very near and dear to my heart. So let's talk about why we are here, why we are sitting in these seats. And I know I sound like a broken record, but I keep bringing up our Bill of Rights, our inherent rights as South Dakotans. Part of that talks about inquiring and protecting property and the pursuit of happiness. Why do you think that the authors of this document put all of those three things together? Because pursuit of happiness is tied to us acquiring and protecting property. Property doesn't always have to be land. It can be your vehicle, it can be the home that you live in, it can be the cash in your bank account, the clothes on your back. All of those things are things that we should be able to own and enjoy without infringement upon them. So HB 52 is a simple bill. It's one sentence. It says, notwithstanding the provisions of any other law, a person may not exercise the right of eminent domain to acquire right-of-way for, construct, or operate a pipeline for the preponderant purpose of transporting carbon oxide. So you have two handouts on your desk. One of them comes from a handout that Attorney General Marty Jackley handed out at a presentation he did at the Senate Ag and Natural Resources Committee in 2023. And I happened to be sitting in that meeting that day, and I really paid attention. The other handout comes from our own Legislative Research Council, a white paper that they prepared in April of 2022. April of 2024. And I'm just going to read part of that to you. It says, the capacity to exercise eminent domain rests solely with the federal and state legislatures, and that power must be delegated by the legislature for any entity to exercise it. Subject to constitutional limitations, it is for the legislature to determine how and by whom the power of eminent domain may be exercised. So I would remind you today that eminent domain is a power. It's a big, heavy hammer that can be easily abused. Eminent domain actually derives from the Latin term dominium eminens, which means supreme lordship. Think about that for a minute. And you and I have the power to give that eminent domain hammer to somebody else. This is a power that can be lorded over landowners to threaten or coerce them into doing something that they would not normally do if they had the freedom to say no thank you. So I just want to talk a moment about carbon pipeline companies. They are free to apply for siting permits in this state. They are free to obtain right-of-way or easements from anyone in this state, just like wind and solar developments can do. They just don't get the supreme power of eminent domain to force their projects down the throats of South Dakota people. In fact, I would remind you that in Minnesota, a CO2 pipeline cannot invoke eminent domain under state law.
Jorgensen yields.
Yet they have a permit and are making great headway with their approved route. So we in South Dakota, we should not be lagging behind our neighboring state of Minnesota. We should have better property rights than our neighboring state. So it's time for South Dakota to do the right thing for South Dakota. And that is to bring legislative certainty to the issue of eminent domain for CO2 pipelines in this state. South Dakotans deserve to have the key to property rights placed back in their hands, giving them the right to open the door to anyone who comes calling, or to simply say, no, thank you. The people of this state have spoken loud and clear. And since I've traveled the state and spoken to myriads of people, I know this very well. I've listened to their intent pleadings for relief, and in response, after 3 years in the making, we sit here today with this particular bill. It is the people's bill. It is what they have asked for, and frankly, it is their right. South Dakota is open for business and will remain that way so long as we protect our existing businesses, our family farms, our ranches, and our citizens that make the state great. Giving property owners back the key to their own property will be the long-awaited relief that South Dakotans have asked for. And I would remind all of our House members, again, that the people of South Dakota are now aware of this issue and have spoken loudly. As I sat in the PUC meeting in the summer of 2023, I was testifying, and I was asked the question, so you believe there are more things that are important than economic development? And my response to that was, yes, it's called freedom. So I would remind you as well, George Washington said freedom and property rights are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. So let's do our job today and vote yes on HB 1052.
Thank you, Representative. Further remarks on House Bill 1052. Representative Mucky.
Question for the prime sponsor.
State your question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good representative from Canton. Just a quick question. I know I'm trying to get this clarification for myself, but clarification for the body. How is the words "a person" defined for this purpose of the statute?
Representative Lems, do you wish to answer that question?
Yes, I do. Yes, a person encompasses any company or corporation as well.
Follow-up, Representative Mucky.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Further remarks on House Bill 1052. Representative Derby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition today of House Bill 1052 for two simple reasons. One, words matter. And in the bill, it talks about carbon oxide. I want to read the definition of carbon oxide. Generally refers to a group of chemical compounds containing only carbon and oxygen, with the most common examples being carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. Essentially, any compound where carbon is bonded to oxygen is considered carbon oxide. So I have a broad concern that the language in the bill is too broad. And we've been talking about carbon dioxide, CO2, for a year and a half now. And what's in the bill does not represent that. It's just too broad. Secondly, the Trump administration supports, we all know this, for his energy independence program, supports CO2 pipelines, biofuels, and aviation fuel. And if this bill is, the intention is to prohibit CO2 pipelines in the future in any way, shape, or form, I'm against it, and I support the Trump administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Further remarks on House Bill 1052, Representative Shorma.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also rise in opposition to House Bill 1052. I understand the referral 21 bill and why it was brought against 201. I disagree with it, but nevertheless, that was done. But before that was voted on in November, the Supreme Court in approximately October, determined that the Summit pipeline is not a utility. Therefore, eminent domain cannot be used. What are we doing? Eminent domain can already not be used for the Summit pipeline. I am a supporter of the $300 to $500 million per year that the South Dakota economy will gain as a result of sequestration of CO2 and producing low carbon aviation fuel. I don't know if you know this or not, but within the last month, Delta Airlines sent a letter committing to purchasing 100% of the low carbon aviation jet fuel being produced, proposed to be being produced in South Dakota. Since I believe this bill is on the floor in an attempt to help kill the pipeline, I will be voting no. Keep in mind, the Supreme Court determined the Summit pipeline is not a utility and therefore eminent domain cannot be used. So we don't need this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Further remarks on House Bill 1052? Representative Schaefbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question for the prime sponsor.
State your question.
The bill is titled Prohibit the Exercise of Eminent Domain for a Pipeline that Carries Carbon Oxide, as the good representative to my right stated. Can you explain to me and the body why you decided to use those exact words?
Representative Lems, do you wish to answer that question?
Yes, I do. So carbon oxide is also used in the federal law under the 45Q tax credit, which coincides with the sequestration. They use the term carbon oxide in that, and I will remind the body as well, we use the same language was used last year in House Bill 1219, so this is not the first time we have seen that.
Follow-up, Representative Schaefbauer.
No follow-up, a comment, if I may.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the good representative from Canton for bringing this bill. It seems like this is one of those nuisances that we have to keep dealing with when the citizens of South Dakota back in November of 2024 said, you know what, last year during session, the legislature did something wrong and they voted in SB 201. So the citizens of South Dakota said, we are going to use what we can to fight for our rights and our freedoms. I represent the District 3, which is the city of Aberdeen. It is a very, I'll say urban, because it's only the city of Aberdeen. This specific pipeline, this specific company, we have 3 ethanol plants within 30 miles in a straight line along a major highway. I swore on oath to the Constitution to protect the citizens of my district. If this bill did not specifically say carbon oxide, which is the 45Q tax credit, that's the only reason this project is being built, is to gain this tax credit. So my community, along with the other few communities that are in the 30 miles, because of this tax credit and this definition that gains the tax credit, these communities are in jeopardy. And I just think that if we need to protect against eminent domain in this direction, I'm all for this. So I am a yes on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further remarks on House Bill 1052? Representative Mullally.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question for the prime sponsor.
State your question.
Knowing that the Supreme Court ruled in the way with the company that now has or had the application as a not being a commodity, or so they can't use eminent domain, is there a possibility in the future that another company coming in could use a different form of permitting and be allowed to use eminent domain if they were considered a commodity?
Representative Lems, do you wish to answer that question?
Yes, I do. Yes, that is a distinct possibility. And many of these pipelines are being proposed across the country. So this may not be the last time that we see this issue arise.
Follow-up, Representative?
Follow-up, please.
Go ahead.
With some of the, I have heard that some of the pipelines that are running through Nebraska to Wyoming were designed for natural gas, and they are no longer being used for natural gas. And the question is, would these pipelines possibly be used for future carbon oxide sequestration without having to build the pipeline?
Representative Lems, do you wish to answer that question?
Yes, I do. That is the Tallgrass project in Nebraska. And yes, they are looking to convert those pipelines over to CO2 pipelines.
Further questions or remarks? Representative Mullally? Okay. Further remarks on House Bill 1052? Representative Jamison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've just got one particular problem I see with this bill. And this good sponsor brought it up, the legislative certainty. You know, obviously this applicant that we're, in essence, with this bill trying to stop, has spent millions of dollars preparing, processing, applying, defending themselves in court to go through the regulatory process of getting a pipeline built. Eminent domain was a part of that process, was a part of the rules. Here are the rules. This is the game we're going to play. Not the game, it's really the rules provided for them to follow. And they have invested a tremendous amount to do this project, which was a federal program, which is offering those tax credits, you know, that we've all talked about. So here, like was mentioned from our good representative from out west, you know, the idea that they are trying to find solutions for some of our energy independence through the federal government and the programs that they offer. And as was mentioned in this white paper, it is up to the exercise eminent domain with the federal and state legislatures. So here's a state that's trying to figure this out. Yeah, it's a sloppy deal. It's a weird deal that they get tax credits and they got to do this game, but it's not our program. It's the federal program. And all of us were elected just recently. So when you talk about this process that this applicant has gone through, not only did they start some time ago, go through the court system, and now has been sent back and is reapplying through this, a lot of us who've voted on issues regarding this are no longer here, and there's new people here. So imagine you as an applicant trying to navigate these waters forward, knowing that the legislative body could change and create new laws. Sometime at some point when that process starts, they have to know what the rules are. And I believe that this attempt at this bill is an attempt to really stop that, change it, prevent them from going forward. And I think that sends a terrible message. And I also believe that, you know, perhaps in some sense that all of those others who've already signed up to allow this pipeline to come across their land, is that the majority? Is it a minority? I think what this bill is addressing is a minority of the property owners who have not signed up. And there's still time. It could still happen. I just wish I would just ask this body to resist this bill and not change the rules for this applicant who has invested millions. It sends a terrible message to the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Further remarks on House Bill 1052. Representative Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of HB 1052. I'd like to direct your attention to the opinion of the South Dakota Supreme Court. Footnote 5. The way I do the math, as Justin Kern outlined this, Summit Carbon Solutions can obtain a federal tax credit of $85 for each metric ton of CO2 sequestered. And the court stated that when fully sequestered, or full, I guess you'd say it, in the facility in North Dakota, that's 18 million metric tons. So at $85 for each metric ton, as I do the math, that's $1,530,000,000 that our federal government is going to subsidize whoever Summit Carbon Solutions owners really are, which I've tried very hard to find out, and I can't. So here's the thing. South Dakota law, as Justice Kern pointed out, is silent on whether CO2 is a commodity. Other states have passed legislation that CO2 is a commodity. This legislature has never been asked to do that. In my opinion, that would have been the foundational point for a CO2 pipeline, is to first square away the legal definitions. Otherwise, see, we're in the permission of facing a situation where Summit Carbon Solutions would rather ask for forgiveness than ask for permission. And that's a situation that doesn't sit well with me. And it doesn't sit well with the Supreme Court and our constitutional history of property rights. Justice Kern pointed out in this unanimous decision that the right to exclude is the most fundamental right of property ownership, citing a Supreme Court case that goes back a number of years. And that was in the context of merely a right of access for survey purposes. Our Supreme Court said, the right of access for survey purposes nonetheless constitutes a taking of the landowner's right to exclude, one of the most treasured rights of property ownership. And the Supreme Court held that a pre-condemnation survey was a taking. Well, eminent domain, if a pre-condemnation survey is a taking, then eminent domain is far beyond that. This is not an anti-pipeline bill. This is a bill that requires Summit Carbon Solutions to do what every other developer does in a project, which is to negotiate with the landowners. Keep the playing field level. Now, I also want to point out that our Supreme Court concluded that when the judges in the Third and Fifth Circuit denied discovery motions to compel, that the courts abused their discretion by not allowing the landowners to proceed with additional discovery, things on safety issues, all of that information. Now, I've been a lawyer for over 4 decades, and I've represented some very big institutions and entities, and some of the smallest, including some of the most common of the people in our state. And I will tell you that with $1.5 billion on the line, Summit Carbon Solutions just needs to play the game fairly and respect the landowners instead of please read the opinion. It's a lengthy opinion, but it's easy for us to forget and to pay heed to what our fine Supreme Court has given us in terms of a summary of the history of this entire matter. So, eminent domain doesn't belong in this context. We don't have CO2 defined as a commodity, for Pete's sake. I believe it is in Nebraska. It might be in Iowa. So let's go back to the basics and start with the rule of law and due process. And Summit Carbon Solutions should propose legislation to authorize this body to approve CO2 as a commodity if they want to exercise eminent domain. Our Supreme Court ruled—
Ismay yields.
Thank you. The 2 circuit court judges who I know and have appeared in front of, sua sponte, that means on their own motion, tried to fill in the gap. And they concluded as a matter of law, which frankly in my decades of practice, judges virtually never, ever do things sua sponte. But it happened in this case, which is an attempt to fill in the legal gaps to make this pipeline project, squish it into South Dakota law. That's a legislative public policy function, not for the courts. And our Supreme Court reversed the 2 judges and sent it back to say, we're not ruling one way or the other, but you need to do your homework and take evidence and testimony to do what? To establish a proper record for appellate review. That is how our system works. That is the separation of powers. That is respect for the legislative public policy making, which by statute and organic law in this state, that's our job, to make public policy. Vote for HB 1052.
Thank you, Representative. Just a point of clarification, Representative Garcia yielded her time to Representative Hughes, so Representative Ismay, you still have the balance of your time. Further remarks on House Bill 1052. Representative Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. I might have been quoted as saying this is the best gig in the state. And of course, for those of you up in the audience, that's really twofold, is because there's only been a little over 4,200 people ever got to do this job, and what an honor each and every one of us believe in. But the other thing is that it's the burden and the pleasure in some sense that we have a bill such as this that really goes to the heart, and you're going to have to find out what you really believe in, what really motivates you to push a button today. And most people don't have that opportunity to do that. Maybe once or twice in their life. We do this almost daily, and you find out where your real character is. You know, as I look across this room, I too have practiced law for 47 years and had a lot of jury trials. And I remember a specific case I had where my client was kind of controversial, and this bill is kind of controversial. And as I was looking at this jury and wondering exactly, you know, how they were going to come down on this, and I gave my opening, the other side gave their response, and then I got to get up to do my closing argument. And as I said, well, this is the last time I'm going to get to say anything. And the little old lady sitting in the front said, "Good." Well, some of you, I can see your faces, and you're thinking, I wish you'd sit down. But, you know, I want to bring something up I think it's really important, and that is this. You know, we in the state of South Dakota didn't cause this problem. The federal government did, dealing with tax credits. We didn't create that problem, but we have an issue that we have to deal with, okay, as a result of that. And so we have our ethanol plants, and they can do one of two things. They can either not take the credits, not sell and do what we're talking about here, and pay more for the grain prices, or they got to do something about it. And House Bill 1052, one of the things that bothers me the most about it, I guess from this standpoint, is that I've heard this numerous times. Well, the only people who are benefiting is the companies, the private companies. But you know, that's just not true. That's just not true. You know, I live in Yankton. I'm not live very far from Scotland, and there's an ethanol plant there. And let me tell you something, you know, that ethanol plant does a benefit for the public because they hire people in Scotland that would otherwise have to find other employment. They get paid a salary so they can stay in their small community and raise their children in a community that they want to be at. And as a result of that, there's houses being built in Scotland that wouldn't otherwise be. And we can go across our state and see how many of these little towns are going down because they don't have something in their towns to keep them alive. And then they start losing their schools. And then when they lose their schools, what happens? Their town goes away. You know, grain prices, it's a commodity. It's something that is there to be sold. And if we don't have the option of doing that, where are they going to sell their product? And what does that do for us? Is that not a public benefit? Is it not the fact that then we are able to get lower gas prices? Is that not a public benefit? And I hear so much about they're taking our land. You know, there's hardly a community in this state that doesn't have a zoning board. And what does that zoning board do? It tells you how you can use your land. And I don't mean to be offensive to any farmers because I'm not a farmer, my grandparents were, but you're not farming that land 4 feet underground. I know you're not, you know? And so when we look at this thing and we talk about, we've got into the Supreme Court decisions, and if you really need to get to sleep, then you should read that opinion. But I will just say this, you know, our constitutional rights are not absolute. They are not absolute. They're open to interpretation. And so as we look at this here, I just ask us that we start thinking about, you know, that who's benefiting And quite frankly, in my opinion, and why I'm going to vote against this bill is I think there's benefits on both sides. And I think there's processes that are set up to deal with that. And so I think I would just ask you to think through that as you get ready to vote. And yes, I am done.
Further remarks on House Bill 1052. Representative Auk.
Thank you, Speaker. I have a question for the prime sponsor.
State your question.
Representative, does this bill prevent this company from doing business in the state of South Dakota?
Absolutely not.
Does this bill prevent?
Hold up a second here. Let's go through the speaker. Follow up, Representative Auk.
Follow up, Mr. Speaker. Does this bill prevent the ethanol industry from expanding in this state?
Representative Lems, do you wish to answer that question?
Yes, I do. No.
Follow up, Representative Auk.
Does this bill also prevent any type of additional benefit to the ethanol industry as far as opportunities to expand their CI score?
Representative Lems, do you wish to answer that question?
Yes, I do. The answer is no.
Follow up, Representative Auk.
Just a comment. Thank you, Representative. I too have traveled all over the state and spoken with several farmers, ranchers, myself, a farmer included, in reference to Referred Law 21, who I'm sure everyone in this room recognizes. This bill is not preventing any kind of a company from doing business in this state. It's just basically saying, if we say no thank you, that means no thank you. This company has proven over and over again that they do not have the right to just take our land. They can go around. They can find another route. So we're going to show favorites just because they have to spend a little extra money or be inconvenienced. We're going to show favorites to one company. I'm sorry, I don't think that that's right. Is that how South Dakota does business? We show favorites over one corporation versus another corporation because they're going to spend billions of dollars? Prove it. I don't vote that way. Our constituents don't expect us to vote that way. Our constituents expect us to protect their property rights. And that is the resounding call from the people of this state. We have tried to solve this problem for this company. We've gone round and around for this company. We are not preventing this company from doing business in this state. We are not hurting ethanol corporations or companies. Your ethanol stock will not be damaged. 7 cents a bushel. We raise corn. 7 cents a bushel. Am I willing to trade in my precious property rights, farmland that's been in my husband's family for 5 generations? I don't think so. No, thank you. So we show favoritism to this company. Who's next? Folks, this is about property rights, and this is about the abuse of eminent domain. It is not a conversation starter. 160 families were condemned. Their land was condemned. This is not about hurting or squashing a company's ideas or dreams. This is about protecting our property rights. Please support this bill.
Thank you. Further remarks, Representative Goodwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm not a farmer, but I do own farmland, and I just went to a funeral up in Watertown. When you go to a funeral, of course, you have the lunch afterwards, and you talk to everybody. Well, at the lunch at the funeral, we talked about this and that. It's like a family reunion. And so a lot of my farmer friends, they were in 4-H with me. Our club back then was called the Pelican Boys. It was segregated, the women or the girl 4-Hers, and they were called the Farmerettes. So a bunch of us Pelican Boys sat by the table, and one of them was saying that they were going to go through his land, Summit Solutions. So we said, well, what kind of money did they offer you? That's kind of touchy when you talk to farmers because they're always broke, you know. And he said, well, they offered me, he had a quarter of land, 160 acres going through one corner of it. I offered him $100,000. Now remember, this is 4 feet in the ground. It's covered up again, and you can farm over top of it. It isn't like a windmill where you give up acreage for farming or anything. This you can farm over top of it. Well, these people are, so you can shake your head no. Anyway, He said, but I held out. Thought he was a good negotiator. And he gave him the permit for 160,000. Well, Marcia and I have several quarters that you can go across for just 100. We'll take the low figure. We don't have to have the 160. I mean, so it isn't like this is a big bad wolf that's taking advantage of the farmers. They're getting well compensated. It's just a line in the sand saying if it's our land and we say no, we mean no. But we can argue about that. I know some of the solutions has worked really hard trying to go around, trying to go past places that said no to it. But it isn't as bad as everybody says it is. And the representative from Rapid City, I think, hit it really hard. You know, on November 5th, not only did he get elected, but we have a new president. And the new president's pro this. So why would we've been dying to get this president in here for 4 years? Now we're going to make it harder for his policies to come for South Dakota? So I'm going to vote no on this, and I would hope that most of you follow me.
Thank you. Further remarks, Representative Sharda.
I'm going to support this bill 1052. It's a pretty simple bill. It's just about eminent domain for carbon dioxide. Eminent domain is a sticky subject. It's needed for public use, for things that we all use, for water, for roads, schools. There's a use for eminent domain, but for private companies to make money is not a use for it. And to say that, you know, if a person like the former speaker just said wants to give their easement up for money, good for them. That's private property rights. They can do that if they want to. But if someone wants to say no, they should be able to. And they say that you can still farm over it if you want to. Well, that is true, but you give up the right to build on your land. If you want to put a house on it, if you want to sell your housing easement, housing eligibility on it, that's big money. Where I come from, housing eligibilities, you lose that. So you lose the use of your land by giving it up, by being forced to give it up. So I'll be supporting this bill. Please join me.
Thank you. Further remarks on House Bill 1052. Representative Fascard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the body. I got several things I want to address. I'm a farmer. I farmed all my life. I understand. I have a real difficult time understanding why we're even having this discussion, because CO2 is what helps me grow my crops and everything I grow. And it is very concerning to me. One thing that was brought up about federal projects in South Dakota, if you want an interesting read, go back and read about the Wahi Irrigation Project, a federal project that came to South Dakota. They started construction, but eventually the landowners stopped it. I think Jimmy Carter was the one that pulled the funding for that. So there is, if you go back and read that, you can see a lot of similarities there. The other thing I want to address is the economic issues for agriculture. We overproduce. We're darn good at what we do. When ethanol plants came around back 20 years ago, we heard the same thing. We need a market for our corn. We need a place to go with our corn. Well, we did that, and I've shipped thousands of bushels to the ethanol plant, and here we are 20 years later, and we're getting paid less than the cost of production. It's because when you produce at a premium price, everybody wants to produce. My grandfather and my father always told me high prices bring low prices, and low prices bring high prices. And that has held true through most of my career as a farmer. The other thing I want to talk about is the depth of this thing, 4 feet deep. This is a dangerous gas. If you have bird flu, they pump the building full of CO2 and it does its job. And I have concerns about that. I have a post hole digger that fits on the back of my 3-point tractor that will dig a hole 4 feet deep. Somewhere down the road, 10 or 20 years from now, and somebody doesn't know that it's there, what's going to happen? The safety is a big issue. The ethanol plants have options here. We talk about our communities, and the jobs. I don't see them going away. If CO2 was truly a problem, why is the EPA not letting us burn 20 or 30% in our gasoline? It's pretty well been documented that it improves efficiencies of our engines and mileage, and it reduces tailpipe emissions. If CO2 was really an issue, we should have been burning this higher blends for years. That would increase the demand for corn, increase the price of corn, and we wouldn't be spending billions of dollars in tax revenue. And I'll wrap this up. It's been brought up. I had the option, 2 people called me from Summit Carbon Solutions. I serve on several leadership ag committees. We sat down with them at the local convenience store and we talked about this. I told them my concerns as a farmer and we had a good discussion. At the end, they asked if there were any questions. And I said, yeah, I have two. One, did you complete the pipeline in Minnesota without eminent domain? They said, yes. Second question, why did you come to South Dakota and open a hornet's nest? After a few minutes, they thought and said, well, I guess we could have done things differently. As a business person, and I've done plenty of deals over my life, I certainly don't want to be doing business with people like that and the way they have treated South Dakotans. I think they have caused more of the problems for themselves than what we have done. As was mentioned, there's many people out there that have signed up, and that's great. I don't have a problem with it. That's their choice. This bill gives a choice to the landowners who don't want to sell. And like I say, they did it in Minnesota. They went around and did it. They can do it here. I will support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Garcia yielded 5 minutes of her time to Representative Hughes. She has 5 minutes remaining. Representative Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to redirect everybody here that eminent domain is the power of the government to take private property for public use with also compensation. However, during this whole course, I don't think permits were used correctly. I just want to make sure everyone understands the definition because the devil's always in the detail. The second thing I just want to clarify is carbon oxide. People seem to be getting hung up on carbon oxide. I'd like to just take a moment to educate you on carbon oxide. And that refers to a group of chemical compounds containing only carbon and oxygen. Examples being carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. Essentially any compound where carbon is bound to oxygen. Now, even though we haven't gotten this far for the CO2 and the good new Green Deal, you can eventually peel off hydrogen from the carbon. We have not perfected it yet. So I want to put that out there before you vote and know that there can be hydrogen peeled off as well in time to come, which would be essentially other disastrous things. I am for this bill.
Thank you. Further remarks on House Bill 1052, Representative Greenfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to clear something up. My friend from Sioux Falls mentioned that he felt that maybe it was too late in the game to start switching things up because the summit has given, millions and millions of dollars to some of the farmers. Well, I might not be the best business person in the world, but I'm smart enough to know that you don't give money up front and then expect something to be delivered. That doesn't even make any sense to me. That's not good business practice. And so I just wanted to have you reflect whether these people are victims or if they're just self-made victims, because I think they're self-made victims. I don't do business personally with what ifs and maybes. I don't think that that is a good way to do business either. Case in point, quote, we heard that Delta's going to, get all their low carbon fuel from us, or we're going to get 45Q tax credits. We don't know that. That's not set in stone. Have you ever heard of being double dealt? I pointed that out to the Glacial Lakes man. I said, Carbon Solutions has been double dealing people all the way through and bullying. I said, what makes you think you're not going to get double dealt in the end? Something to think about. I have a friend who owns 500,000 shares in the ethanol business at Watertown, 500,000 shares. And he said to me, this is all the silliest thing. If they think that I would ever put a pipeline under my ground and stand to question my children's future in so doing, he said, I couldn't live with myself. So that's how some of the people that have big shares in ethanol feel. I would suggest that we vote green on this bill, and I thank you.
Thank you. Further remarks on House Bill 1052, Representative Reich.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime sponsor of this bill, both on the floor here today and in House State Affairs Committee, uses our former governor's, one of her favorite sayings, South Dakota is open for business. Are we really? Previous speakers here today suggests this bill is just about one company, Summit Carbon Solutions. There's a $1.5 billion GEVO plant to produce sustainable aviation fuel planned for construction in my legislative district, just east of Lake Preston. They will purchase 38 million bushels of corn per year, but they need a carbon pipeline in order to make their business viable. The taxes generated by this plant, this one new business will greatly benefit local governments, schools, counties that are hurting. Tremendous benefit to local government. One of this bill's proponents in committee stated that the use of eminent domain to build a railroad was proper because it transports corn and soybeans, which benefits our farmers. Well, a new market for 38 million bushel of corn per year will certainly benefit our producers. Additionally, every ethanol plant in South Dakota supports the construction of the pipeline. 2/3 of the corn grown in this state go through ethanol plants. Which future billion-dollar business will we close the door on next? Please join me in keeping South Dakota open for business and oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Further remarks, Representative Norstrup.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wasn't going to talk about GEVO, but I will. The first time I heard about GEVO was the governor said the largest economic development in the history of South Dakota, $1 billion development. Pretty impressive. Within the last few weeks, I read in the media that GEVO is in the process of applying for a $1 billion government loan. $1 billion government loan to build a $1 billion plant. Does that sound like economic development to you? Take the money away from the taxpayers, get it to the government, get it to GEVO, and then create a sustainable fuel, which is designed for airlines that have no engines that can run it. The airlines cannot run it. They'll have to retrofit the entire, but that's off topic. Let me go back to what I wanted to talk about. There's a national debt. Every man, woman, and child, taxpayers, non-taxpayers, my grandchildren, take the national debt today, divide by the number of people, is $106,971. $106,000 national debt. If I take everybody in here's got a family of 3 and multiply it out, we as a group, now I lost my number, I believe it was $33 million. We and our families owe $33 million that we spent that we do not have. So now let me go back to the original part of this whole story. The expense, let's say, where's the money coming from? It is $1.5 billion, which is $85 a ton, going from the taxpayers, printing press, going from the printing press to Summit. And then why would we pay them that? Why would we pay them $1.5 billion, which comes to $15 billion over 10 years? The answer is to prevent climate change. We're spending $1.5 billion a year to prevent climate change. So I went to the representative of the company that we're talking about today. And I said, here's the deal. I'm going to give you $15 billion. What do I get back in exchange? The answer is reduce the temperature of the earth. That's the whole point. I said, how much do I get? If I give you 15 billion, what do you give me? Well, and his honest answer was approaching zero. Approaching zero, I said, exactly how close does it get when it approaches zero? He says, yeah, it gets close. I says, does it actually hit zero? He says, yes. So here's the business deal that we're doing. We, the taxpayers, send $15 billion off to Washington, D.C. It goes to Summit Carbon, and they deliver zero climate change. That's not a good deal. Within the last few days, President Trump says this CI score has got to go away. The whole foundation of this whole thing is a CI score. Trump says it goes away. I got another summit. I got another story for you. There's a thing called a plume steady. The plume steady is this. The pipe bust and the CO2 comes out and it covers territory. And a steady tries to show where's the danger zone. At the very beginning, Summit Carbon said, we're not going to release it. They're not going to release the plume studies. They're confidential. The question was, why is it confidential? Because we don't want the terrorists to know about it. What do you mean you don't want the terrorists to know about it? Because it kills people, and it kills a lot of people. Here's the deal, talking economic development. Aberdeen, there is a ethanol plant on Highway 12 is the main economic engine of Aberdeen.
More yields.
Thank you. In Groton, on Highway 12, is an ethanol plant. In Aberdeen, on the outskirts of Aberdeen, on Highway 12 is an ethanol plant. West of town is an ethanol plant. How do you connect 3 dots that are all on Highway 12? The shortest route possible. If this thing goes through, people will not want to put a business on Highway 12. I won't want to live on Highway 12. We talk about changing the game. Changing the game. Farmers, 5th generation, 6th generation ranchers and farmers bought the land, fought for it, paid it, and then an out-of-state billionaire company shows up and says, we want to take and use your land. That's changing the game after 136 years, 135 years. Open for business. My goodness. If you think economic development is taking government money, everything in this is government money. One last story, and then I'll sit down. Thank you. A couple of months ago, the legislators in Aberdeen went to a meeting. We went to a meeting of the domestic violence shelters, and they were being cut, I believe, $4 million statewide, I believe, by 19 different locations. What's a domestic shelter, violence shelter? A woman is being threatened by her husband. She's got kids. She needs a place to go because her husband is crazy or evil, pick one. So they're cutting the funds of these guys. So here's the hypocrisy and the irony and the craziness of this. The federal government doesn't have $4 million to protect that family, but has got $1.5 billion to buy $0 worth of climate change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Further remarks, Representative Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm going to echo the comments of the previous speaker. I hope that this is used for fracking. I'm not really too interested in the Qs and Zs and everything else. I hope that we can use this for fracking someday, but I'll get back to that. First of all, to anybody that's dealing with eminent domain issues, and I don't remember if there's any things outstanding or not, maybe they've been retracted, but I have empathy for you if I got that. I mean, I know there's a few in the audience right now that have dealt with it. It'd be frustrating. I'd probably be pretty mad too, especially if it's something that I don't want. So I sure hope they can reroute it around you to get this done. You know, in my district, we don't have a lot of pipeline going through our district. I live in northern McCook County, and east of me about 10 miles, we have about 8 parcels. They all signed up 2.5 years ago. So I don't have any constituents or landowners within my district that are dealing with all of these issues. So I don't hear from my constituents about it. But for those that do, I understand why you're fighting so hard for what your constituents are asking you to do. I respect that. And to a little levity, I mean, I feel many of you have heard me talk about this issue a lot, so I resemble the comments of the good speaker from Yankton earlier, where I'm sick of hearing myself talk about this. I truly am. And I apologize to you all for talking today. As you can tell, I'm a little apprehensive because I don't even feel like I need to talk about this. But for my background, for those that don't know, and please nobody give me your time. I don't need more than 5 minutes. I'm a family farmer, 5th generation. have the sixth. He's almost 2 years old. And farming's my livelihood. I'm fortunate I'm a rancher too, so the ranching's good. The row cropping's a little tough right now, but that's my background. Live on the same section that my great-great-grandpa came over to in 1901. He moved over in 1900, moved east to where we are today in 1901, and that's where we are today. But that's my background, and that's why I'm so passionate about this issue. Couple talking points. You know, Trump supports biofuels. And like I said, Trump supports fracking. I sure hope we can work together with the oil fields up in North Dakota and work together and get more oil out and also produce more ethanol and SAF at the same time. A low carbon option. Whatever the president or the administration wants to do at that time, that's their decision. We don't get to affect federal policy whether we want it or not. The next point is delicate, and please don't misunderstand my words. I feel that the policy, the way this bill is structured, is fairly arbitrary. Not the important issue as a whole, but the policy. It does not reference or acknowledge any existing laws. In fact, it places itself above all current and future laws with the words, notwithstanding the provisions of any other law. I'll repeat it, notwithstanding the provisions of any other law. So all laws are thrown out the window in this instance. My next concern is this bill will become a vehicle to prohibit all forms of energy infrastructure expansion. You could easily add oil, natural gas, transmission lines, or any other to this statute if it's in your backyard and you don't like it in the future, and sidestep all common carrier and eminent domain laws. That will result in higher costs for everyone and the potential lack of access to critical energy supplies. Our system of regulation works. The current system we have works. If the carbon pipeline is not ruled a common carrier transporting a commodity, it will not have eminent domain. The prime sponsor and committee and the good representative from Sioux Falls both pointed out in their defense of HB 1052 that a carbon pipeline is not a common carrier. Over and over. That's a strong belief that they have. If that is in fact the case, then this bill is redundant because current laws will prohibit eminent domain for a carbon pipeline. Current laws will prohibit eminent domain for a carbon pipeline if they are correct. So I don't think that this bill is necessary. I don't think any of us that are voting no today take lightly the hardships that people have faced that don't want this pipeline. I sure as heck hope we can reroute around all of them so that
Legislative coverage on SDPB is supported by the South Dakota Bar Foundation, SDN Communications, Missouri River Energy Services, Wrench Law, and your membership in the Friends of SDPB. Thank you.
I believe there's something that, another thing that we need to discuss possibly, and I just want you guys to know that I know my district. District 28 is one of the most remote and, quite honestly, some of the toughest people you'll ever meet. And I am so glad that this did not go through my district because there would have been a fight, and I don't want that. Eminent domain on people in my district, you'll have a war. And I'm not kidding, just a little skirmish. These people will fight. So you need to think about that before you let a company steamroll a bunch of people, because it'll happen. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Further remarks, Representative Emery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of House Bill 1052. From a tribal perspective, the land is deeply rooted in the respect for its culture, spiritual, and environmental significance. For generations, tribes have understood that land is not merely a resource to be used, but a living entity to be cared for. The legacy that we are obligated to protect. This bill offers protections that align with those values, ensuring that those closest to the land have voices for its future. Unlike the opposition I hear today, the preponderance for this bill isn't grounded in property boundaries or in titles, but for the enduring stewardship of the land. But I would like to also point out, as I did with Senate Bill 201, where was the strong opposition for Dakota Access Pipeline when it endangered tribal water, the land, and the multiple sites that it ran through. I digress. Please support 1052.
Thank you. Representative Odenbach.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to maybe try to summarize this a little bit with some of the same points that I made after we heard this bill and passed it through the State Affairs Committee. It seems to me, after listening to all the testimony, both in State Affairs and on the House floor here today, there's three things. There's the political, there's the safety, and there's the legal aspects to this. And the political aspects, I think the voters have made crystal clear, and this is the House of Representatives. 65 of 66 counties, and every county that has an ethanol plant, I might add, voted against Senate Bill 201. And for good or ill, they equated 201 essentially with what we're doing here today. And this bill here today, I think, is the response of the political process to what some deemed a political earthquake, to what the voters asked us to do. And I think it's a message we should heed. And to that end, the idea that the Trump administration supports this, I think I would call that an open question. I've been watching Fox News like everybody else the last week, and he's rolling back Green New Deal mandates in real time. And I've said to others, I think this issue may sort itself out about the time that we sort it out when this bubble pops and we stop having federal money be the really only source of income or reason for being for some of these projects. The second thing I found interesting in state affairs was a safety aspect. The question was asked of some of the lobbyists for Summit, why don't you just put these things in the right of way with all the other utilities like water lines and electric lines and not have these problems with eminent domain? And they basically said, well, we've got real concerns about third parties going in there to dig with their lines, and we're afraid to do that. So they'd rather use eminent domain to run it across your land or my land, because we know that if you puncture an electric line, you get a power outage. If you puncture a water line, you've got a big puddle of water. If you puncture one of these things, well, lots of people can die. That's just the fact of the matter, and that's why they can't put them in the right of way. And then the legal. I've heard it said, well, the Supreme Court ruled that this is not a commodity, or I guess they ruled they haven't made a showing sufficient to say they're a commodity. And so we've been told, well, the Supreme Court has ruled on this. Let's just leave the issue alone. Let's not do anything about it. We've been elected to act in this space. We need not, and we should not just wait for the courts to sort this out. This is our job. And the reason we haven't sorted out eminent domain in the past is why we've had this huge issue, why so many of our citizens got sued, and why we've had rallies both in this building and all over the state. And so I just ask you to consider those 3 points. And let's do the right thing. Let's be the House of Representatives. We were elected to give heed to their voice. And we need to pass this bill. I hope you'll join me in voting green.
Thank you. Further remarks on House Bill 1052, Representative Poirier.
Mr. Speaker, I have a remark.
Go ahead.
My good representative from Centerville mentioned Minnesota. They didn't need eminent domain in Minnesota. You know why? Because they have a law on the books, a specific law that says no eminent domain for CO2. The other reason is that the PUC approved their pipeline based on 3 things. The PUC of Minnesota said, okay, you could build this pipeline, but landowners are gonna go in to deal with you voluntarily. It's gonna be safe. This is a new technology, so you gotta be safe. And you're a new company, so you're gonna have financial considerations. So that's why we as lawmakers set the policy in this state. And if we say no eminent domain for carbon pipeline, then that is the policy. Adjust and overcome. South Dakota citizens do it every single day. The last thing I'll say is I'll remind you, what happened last time land was forcibly removed for federal interests. You could look at 9 tribal nations across this state and see the results of that. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Further remarks, Representative Overweg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I respectfully yield the remainder of my time to the bill's main sponsor.
Representative Lems, in closing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I would just say from day one, all that the people in this state that I have talked to that have had concerns about what has been going on have said, take eminent domain off the table. And I believe if we had that policy in our state, that this project would probably already be done. South Dakota is open for business, but not at the expense of South Dakota citizens' rights. This is not stopping any project. Like has been mentioned, in Minnesota, they cannot use eminent domain for this project. And guess what? They are getting it done. How do they do that? They treat people right and they make a deal, a willing buyer, a willing seller. Property rights should never be controversial. I should say protecting property rights should never be controversial. Let's put the key to property ownership back into the hands of the property owner. I believe that if this bill is passed and moves on to the Senate and passes there and ends up on the governor's desk, that there will be a concerted sigh of relief across this state. You may even hear it. You might even hear some hallelujahs go up. So I would just say it's finally time to do the right thing and give certainty in this legislative process. Please vote green on HB 1052. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Seeing no further remarks.
Mr. Chair, a chance to rebut the comments that were just made.
I'm sorry, Representative. We've closed out the
I
debate.
expressed to you earlier that I wanted to speak at the end, and Mr. Representative stood up and said, I yield my time. I should be, it's just a few comments that I want to make.
Would any member wish to speak before Representative Sharma speaks for a second time? Representative Sharma.
Thank you. Last week, a gallon of low-carbon ethanol with the exact same chemistry, but the CI score was under 25 instead of 55. It was worth.
Point of order, please.
Representative Mullally, state your point.
I believe that you have closed this out, and I challenge your ruling to allow the good representative from Clay County to speak on it again, since the prime sponsor has closed this out.
Okay, I'll explain my ruling, and then we'll have a vote on that. So traditionally, if we wanted to strictly close out the debate, we would move to call the previous question. By custom, what we've been doing recently is allowing for the leadership to yield their time. So technically under the rules, Representative Sharma is allowed to speak because we didn't call the previous question. That's my ruling. Do you want to challenge that ruling? Representative Mullally? Hold on, Representative Mullally.
By rules, you are correct. By precedence, I don't agree with you.
So are you proceeding with the challenge to my ruling? Okay. Representative Sharma, would you like to finish your remarks? Representative Jensen, do you have a point of order?
I'd like to call the previous question.
That's not in order right now. Representative Sharma is in the middle of his remarks. Representative Sharma.
I'll be brief. Last week, a gallon of low-carbon ethanol was 31 cents per gallon more. Currently, our South Dakota ethanol plants can get 3 gallons of ethanol out of every bushel of corn. Therefore, 31 cents times 3 equals 93 cents of value added to a bushel of corn. With 600 million bushels of South Dakota corn used in ethanol production, that's $550 million of revenue. Now, You said, okay, well, yeah, we opened up these ethanol plants and corn prices went up, but now they're back down again low. How do you get prices go up higher? More demand. I'm in business. I understand. You get more demand. Okay. Now, the last item I want to talk about is federal tax credit. Do you know that South Dakota pays less in federal taxes than we receive now? Who pays the excess for all of this stuff? The very people that will benefit from low carbon fuel. California, Illinois, New York, other major states contribute to the federal tax dollars that we will benefit from in the state of South Dakota. So I just wanted to make that point. And with that, I'll just close out my remarks. And thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thank you. Seeing no further remarks, the question before the House is final passage of House Bill 1052. All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed, nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine and the members will proceed to vote. Representative Moore.
Personal privilege.
Granted.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce a person in the gallery today. He's been a mentor for me for about the last 2 years and 2 weeks. He's a past Brown County legislator, and it's Craig Shoneman. He's right up here in the corner trying to sneak out on me, I see. Please give him applause.
Welcome. Representative Van Huysen.
Personal privilege.
Granted.
Mr. Speaker, there's someone in the gallery I'd like you to help me welcome today. Our state historian, Dr. Ben Jones, who I want to recognize particularly because of the role he played in helping commemorate our 100th legislative session as a member of our committee and also doing a lot of the work with the Historical Society to develop the materials that we've seen and will be seeing. And he's a District 13 resident. So please welcome Dr. Ben Jones.
Welcome.
Representative Heerman, Representative Sharma, Representative Wahlberg, Mr. Speaker, all members have voted.
The clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there were ayes 49, nays 19, excused 1.
House Bill 1052, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elect, is hereby declared passed. Quiet in the gallery, please. Thank you. Any questions on the title? Seeing none, the title is deemed correct.
House Bill 1067, an act to define the term must.